Hey everyone, welcome back. I hope you all had a nice long weekend. Today we are going to be starting Unit 2, looking at supply and demand. Before we get to that, however, just a couple of reminders about Unit 1 work. All formative assignments, whether it was readings or any formative quizzes we did, those will lock tonight at 11:59 p.m. So make sure you get those in if you want credit for those assignments. And any missing summatives from Unit 1, those will lock 10 school days after their original posting date. So if you're missing any summative assignments from the unit, make sure you're taking time this week to get those submitted so you can get credit for those. Today we are going to be focusing on the law of demand. Before we get to that, however, we need to look at the role that value plays when considering demand. So there are two different types of value. There's intrinsic value as well as extrinsic value. Intrinsic value in terms of economics looks at the value of something from within. It's essentially its inherent value, what it's actually worth. While extrinsic value looks at value of a product that comes from outside objects or forces. Take a pair of Nikes, for example. The inherent value of Nikes is probably a few bucks. When we look at the material that is used to make a pair of Nike shoes, it's actually pretty cheap. While the extrinsic value of Nikes is what we usually see when we go to the store to buy a pair of Nikes. That's value that's placed on those shoes from a premium or from other outside forces from the demand on that product. So when we look at the question of can we measure our value or our satisfaction, and in market systems, the short answer is no. Now, market systems, like what we use in the United States, focus more on people's ability to pay for goods and services. It doesn't measure wants because you may want something, but that does not necessarily mean that you are able to acquire something. Now, value and price are not the same. So you may value something to a certain extent, but that doesn't mean that the price level of value you place on it is the same. Now, when we look at demand, it is defined as the amount of some good or service consumers are willing and able to buy at each price. On the left-hand side of the screen here, you see a demand curve. Now, we'll be focusing on this demand curve a lot throughout this week. We'll look at it next week a little bit too when it comes to supply. But whether it's a demand curve that we're focusing on or a supply curve, the axes will always stay the same. So on the y-axis, we'll always have price. And then on the x-axis, we will always have quantity. In this instance, quantity is looking at quantity demanded of a product. So looking at the law of demand is essentially answering the question of what are people willing and able to buy. The law of demand essentially says that if the price of a good goes down, it's decreasing, the quantity demanded, the amount demanded will go up. And then the opposite is also true. If the price of a good is increasing, the quantity demanded will go down. So think about it. If we see a decrease in price, we see a big sale, the quantity demanded for that good will go up. And the opposite is true. If we see an increase in price, the quantity demanded is going to go down because people don't want to spend much more money. Now, looking here in a little bit more detail at a demand curve, we see this green dot in the middle. This is representing the price. So at this price, whatever that price may be, if we follow that dot down to the quantity demanded line, that's how much quantity demanded of whatever this good is would be at that price. Now, if we were to move up and down the curve, this would represent that idea of value we just discussed. How people with more value on a certain item might be willing to pay a higher price for something, while people with lower value who might not place too much value on something, that would be found lower in the curve. So a good deal is in the eye of the beholder. What it is worth to one person may not be the same as what it is worth to another person. So demand shows how much consumers are willing and able to purchase items at various prices. Now, again, keep in mind that value does not equate price. You might value something to a certain extent, but that does not necessarily mean you would be willing to pay that same price for it. So we're going to be focusing on today looking at quantity demanded. Whenever we are referencing the idea of quantity demanded, we will always be moving up and down this demand curve. And I'll show you an example of what that looks like here on the next slide. So once again, we have our demand curve here on the right. We have our price on the y-axis and our quantity on the x-axis. But now we have this scenario. Let's say we're looking to buy oranges. So we're looking at the demand for oranges. And the price of oranges start to rise. So I'm going to start off by drawing a dot here on my demand curve. So then we're just going to label this D1. We're going to say this is the original demand for oranges. Now, if we were to label that, then we would create a dotted line going down to the quantity axis, and then we'll label that as Q1. Bear with me here, as it's hard to draw on a trackpad. And then we would do the same for the price. So we're going to draw another dotted line, but over here to the y-axis, to the price this time. And then we would label that P1. So we're using ones because this is our original demand. This is the original demand that we see on the demand curve for these oranges. At this price, this is the quantity demanded, whatever quantity that might be, and then at that same price, here is our demand. But now we see the price of oranges going up. So I'm going to use a different color here. So let's say this is our new demand. Let's say the prices of oranges have gone up. So you might want to start by drawing an arrow from P1 then to P2. So you'd follow it over once again, and then you would label it P2. And then instead of D1, this will be D2 because now it's the second demand. This is a change in the quantity demanded. And then you would do the same thing, but now you're following it down to the x-axis, to the quantity demanded. So again, remembering the law of demand. Remember, the law of demand says that when the price of a good increases, the quantity demanded will go down. And that's what happened here. We saw the price of oranges go from this level up to this level. So it increased. Let's say it was maybe $5 and then it went up to $10. Now at this price, we saw the quantity decrease. We saw the law of demand in action. Originally, with our first demand, with our first price level, quantity was higher, but as the price of oranges increased, the quantity decreased. So this is showing you the law of demand, showing you the change in the quantity demanded along the demand curve. Now, this is referred to as a demand schedule. Sort of the same of what we looked at here in the graph, but now it's just put on a table, if you will. So this is also showing the law of demand. As the price decreases, the quantity demanded will increase, as you can see. And then the opposite is also true. If we start at $5 and we go to $10, right, the quantity demanded goes from 8 to 5. So then we see that the quantity demanded will go down as the price goes up. And then the opposite is also true. If we were to start at $20 and then drop the price to 15, the quantity demanded would also increase, or would increase, excuse me, from 1 to 3 because of the price drop. So a demand schedule and this demand curve both demonstrate the law of demand. So to help you guys get a little bit more background information on the law of demand, what a demand curve looks like, as well as a demand schedule, on Schoology there's an assignment called the Demand for Goods and Services reading. It's a short reading with a couple of graphics and a few questions to answer. So just make sure you turn that in once you are done with that today. I'll be available in my WebEx room if you have any questions during class time.